I don't remember suing Wim Hof, but I just listened to this really weird interview that he gave last week, and it's clear that he thinks that I did.
The judge very motivatedly states, mentioning Scott Carney.
The only problem with that is it never happened. This week, Wim's team at Interfire began the first motions in a defamation case against the Dutch newspaper de Volkskrant. Rather than looking to the court to resolve the question, Wim is taking to the media to explain the spate of drownings related to his method and the allegations of sexual and physical abuse against his wife, Caroline. And it is riveting listening. The interview was in Dutch, but fortunately, Black Box, which was the outfit that is recording it, provided an AI-generated audio translation.
En het is 14 jaar na dato, over een tijd. And it is indeed approximately 14 years later.
So the clips that you're going to see in this video are ones that they certified and put out, but they still look a little bit weird and AI generated. I'm not going to fact check every statement that he makes, but I do want to point out a few relevant things because I think he's shown how out of touch with reality he really is. And since he mentioned me quite a few times, I think it's worth talking about the $67 million lawsuit that Raphael Metzger filed against him regarding the death of his daughter Madeline in a pool, which was dismissed this summer, as I reported. Here's Wim describing what happened.
Scott Carney, an investigative journalist in Denver who talks about various drownings. We had a lawsuit about that. After 9,500 pages, the judge very motivatedly states, Scott Carney, the investigative journalist, that it is hearsay, that it is conjecture, unfounded speculation. And with that, everything that the investigative journalist has said about me is dismissed as the prime witness, the most important key witness.
So he's saying he won a lawsuit against me that I was never a participant in. And it's true that I have reported on this case and the various deaths associated with the Wim Hof method over the last few years. It's also true that I've consistently said from the very beginning that the Metzger case was weak. While Raphael Metzger did ask me to write an affidavit on his behalf, I flat out refused to give it. I was never a party to the lawsuit, I was never subpoenaed, and I never showed up in court. I was never a witness, let alone the prime witness. Now, here's the title page of the complaint. Do you see my name there? Of course, court documents do include transcripts of my reporting. They were publicly scraped from YouTube and from my website. I also shared a list of names with Metzger's lawyer, Scott Brust, of some of the people who had drowned doing the Wim Hof method. And at one point that list was public before I had to take it private after the victims were being harassed by Wim Hof's followers. And Metzger's lawyers did send me court documents as they became available, but that was the limit of our involvement. It was a pretty normal journalistic relationship. And it's very important to state that the judge did not weigh in on my reporting whatsoever, because that's not what the case was about. In other words, Wim is making up this entire thing whole cloth. Let me say this another way. Wim Hof is a liar. And you should take everything that Wim Hof says with that knowledge firmly in your pocket as you listen to absolutely anything he says, because Wim, well, he's got an agenda here. He's lying to a conspiracy-minded Dutch journalist in order to convince the public that he is the target of a vast conspiracy to undermine the good work that he is doing in the world to save human health. This is classic narcissism and maybe even megalomania. Over the last 2 years, a growing chorus of reporters in the Netherlands, the United Kingdom, France, and the United States have, independently of one another, shown that people have been dying needlessly while doing the Wim Hof method, particularly in water. That Wim Hof's company, Interfire, has increasingly turned into a cult, and on Wim's own history of physical and sexual abuse against his ex-wife, Caroline. Now, I'll let Wim explain the character of that journalism as he sees it.
It is hatred from people. That is not journalism. It is deeply driven by motives of frustration and hate. That Anneke van Stoffelen, she is a hateful person. To ask such suggestive and leading questions, which probe deeply into the matter at hand, and to misuse her journalistic power by quoting individuals who are completely irrelevant to the situation is highly unprofessional and unethical.
So while complaining about character assassination against himself, Wim then proceeds to character assassinate the journalist who wrote the piece about the abuse allegations. And then he tells her how to actually do journalism. And now go check out this list of sources that he mentions that she used.
Knowing that it is completely irrelevant and then writing it down as if it is a structured story with psychologists, psychiatrists, professors, doctors, all telling a story about a pattern they have detected based on Frankenstein arguments or things that are not true at all in a detailed manner with extensive elaboration and comprehensive analysis by various experts in the field.
Think about this for a second. Doctors, psychiatrists, professors, and independent reporters, and his ex-wife, his brother, friends, and even former instructors have all come together in various ways to tell the truth of the allegations against Wim Hof and his organization. He has been the subject of lawsuits and dozens of news reports. And Wim is saying that all of these independent people who are unrelated to one another are in on a vast conspiracy to undermine him. Is it possible that all of us, and yeah, I'm one of them, I guess, are actually in like a coordinated cabal? Perhaps one that's being funded by Big Pharma. Here's an excerpt from a pretty typical YouTube documentary that is very pro-Hof. This one is by the Mulligan brothers, that explains the idea that Wim Hof is himself repeating.
Wim Hof has been met with pushback. Except most movements don't face the trillion-dollar pharmaceutical industry.
Is there a reason why they don't look towards nature? Is there a reason they stick to drugs?
Yeah, hey, a person with cancer is $1 million per year. So you don't want to lose those clients.
So I guess the idea is that the Wim Hof method actually is the cure for cancer. Big Pharma is trying to cover it up, and that is what this smear campaign is all about. But if you ask me, it seems incredibly complex and, well, just straight up unlikely, especially considering that as a reporter, I am generally in competition for scoops from other reporters. While we can be collegial, and I have indeed spoken to most of these reporters at one point or another, we are hardly in the business of working together. Even so, let's follow Wim's logic here a little bit more. If you can't trust the experts that Wim himself has at one point or another courted, and in my case, who spent more than a decade promoting Wim, then who can you trust to give a true character assessment of who Wim is? Maybe his children, who after the Volkskrant piece came out, hired a PR team and immediately delivered a tearful reprise to the allegations against him.
I hope that everybody sees how the media has treated my father and that this is truly disgraceful and unacceptable.
These same children who never directly witnessed the abuse because Wim had abandoned them for 10 years, only reconnecting with them now that they could start a business together. And it should be noted, just for the record, that when Laura Hoff recorded this particular speech, she was either in Thailand or Bali giving a highly paid lecture series about the Wim Hof method to what looks like pretty affluent followers.
They all said, everything is untrue from our side, but everything is true from their side. And my children are, of course, definitely biased because they are in a business with me. Because we, as a team, together, after I left Caroline, pulled something out of the ground together and with great effort. Would they now be biased? What is it called? Partisan? Would they be partisan? Yes.
So if those children could be biased by Wim's own accounting here, maybe you can trust the journalist Flavio Pasquino, who is interviewing him in this clip, who starts out by saying that he plans to uphold the highest standards of journalistic integrity in the proceedings.
A lawsuit is coming up, and I am of course trying to carry out a journalistic exercise correctly here, but at the same time, we also know that we are friends, which makes it complex. That is why I want to do this with the utmost care, with respect for you, but also with respect for all those involved.
And while we should be able to trust that Pasquino is really going to uphold these standards, The other reporters out there, well, they're a little different.
The mechanism of trial by media is already in full swing.
This is because Pasquino is the sort of journalist who would never let his personal bias get in the way and instead let the audience make up their own mind about the subject at hand, like in his hard-hitting assessment that he made in the middle of this interview.
I have absolutely never ever seen you brag about your salary or even your position in the world in any way in your life. In my view, you truly come across as someone who is genuinely humble and possesses an open-hearted nature. However, I cannot catch you in megalomania. So, where would this story come from?
Well, it could come from Wim Hof getting $50,000 for a one-hour lecture, or from, well, all of the Nobel Prizes that he is sure that he's going to get.
I'm going to receive 10 Nobel Prizes.
As an independent journalist, you would have expected him to press back against Wim instead of cheering him on. Like, for instance, on the fact that I was never in a lawsuit ever against Wim.
But you won that case.
Yes, it turned out to be completely fabricated.
Or maybe just a few minutes later, he could have returned to the point about how genuinely humble Wim was while describing the financial damages that Wim is now seeking in his defamation lawsuit against De Volkskrant.
You get the damage judges, the damage assessors. They will then look at what has been caused here, namely a film for which 10 million has already been raised by knowingly and intentionally causing damage that you know is based on fabrications deliberately. And then ensuring that a film has to be publicly stopped in order to achieve its goal, and that has already brought in 10 million. That is considerable financial damage. Then you have books that I have written in the meantime, which are now ready for publication. They have already cost 750,000 to 800,000 in advances alone. And then such a whole promotional campaign. Indeed, there are indeed millions behind it.
It seems to me that if his court case was beginning the next day, that Wim is, indeed himself, seeking to participate in this so-called trial by media. He's playing both in the court and in the press, which is, of course, his right. But he seems that he is also very concerned with all of the money that he is losing now that he has lost control of the way that the world sees him, and someone who is using the court system to bully the people who are trying to carefully present the truth of what is really going on. Now, the report that I've given you is, of course, inadequate to completely describe the way that the Wim Hof organization twists the truth for their own profit, and how Wim's followers refuse to see the mountain of evidence that many sources have taken forward to show how seriously broken Inner Fire really is. He makes quite a few slanderous statements against the journalists at De Volkskrant.
Anneke van Stoffelen, she is a hateful person, and she most likely has a screw loose in her mind. They have hate. This is hate and frustration.
And about me for, well, putting my reports out on YouTube.
He made a whole series of videos about me on YouTube, the internet. He's just a YouTuber with a lot of stories, fabricated and all.
So what Wim is saying is that he has been the victim of character assassination. And all of the hateful, ignorant, misinforming journalists out there from multiple publications who have done careful research, they're all wrong. And you should believe his unsubstantiated lies, because that is the truth. You should believe only him, because he's about to lose a lot of money and he deserves Nobel Prizes. I think you can decide for yourself what the truth actually is. You should watch that video in its entirety, because there are some interesting revelations and you can get a fuller picture of how Wim talks about the world. So before we go, I just have one last thing to say, and it's a private message to Wim. And so if you're not Wim Hof, you can just, go to the next video. Go do whatever you need to do and scroll forward. Wim, you blocked me on WhatsApp and on email and all of the other channels to get in touch with you, so this is the only place I can do it. And I'm just going to try to speak from my heart here, and I may get some things wrong. We were friends for 10 years, and I wrote a book about you. I thought you were going to be a charlatan, and then you opened my eyes to new ways to think about my body, and I'm grateful for that time. And the thing that was great about you originally when we met, the thing that most impressed me about you was that you pushed the limits of the human body. You pushed the science to new places, and I think a lot of people benefited from that. And as you say, my book became a New York Times bestseller, which was super cool. That helped my career. Awesome. But things really have always been a little unstable with the organization around you and sort of the fame that had built up and the money. And I felt like you had went off message. And where there was no going back for me is when I asked the question, how many people had died? And you had talked briefly about a few. And then when I really did dig in, I'm an investigative journalist. So I'm like a pit bull. When I ask a question, I don't stop. And it was just more and more and more people. It was 33 people right now who've died, and you've sort of just brush it off as if it's like people not wearing their seatbelts in a car, but you're selling a car without seatbelts. And it. This is true. And it's really hard for me to reconcile the facts that are out there versus the way that you're couching yourself. And my feeling is that what's going on is you're sort of been painted into a corner. You want to be right. Everyone wants to be right. But that drive for being right is pushing you into misinformation. It's pushing you into backing up and just making outright lies. And people are being hurt along the way. And I know that it's really hard to change a public-facing part of your personality, because I did it. At the beginning of COVID, my book, The Wedge, came out, and it was all about sauna and ice and breath work and all the cool things that we have done together. And it dropped on the very first day of the COVID lockdown. And I had this opportunity. I was actually booked on the Today Show. And I had this opportunity to go out there and say, the wedge, that concept of the wedge cures COVID. And if I had done that, I would have made just a tremendous amount of money. There's just no doubt that I would have made money on spreading that message that I have the secret to COVID, and it's the wedge. Books would have flown off the shelf. But I couldn't do it because the science wasn't there. The science hadn't gotten to a point where it was interesting. And if I was going to lie for money, I would have been ethically compromised. But I saw you do that. I saw you talk about COVID. You were able to breathe away COVID, that you were, smarter than the science. And you really took this turn into something that I just see as spreading misinformation. You went with Jordan Peterson and Russell Brand, and you went on all the conspiracy talk shows and whatnot, and I just could no longer identify the man who I once thought as great in you, the man who actually wanted science, who wanted to be proven, someone to try to prove them wrong and show that he was right. But instead, what you're doing now is lying. And eventually, when I saw that people were actually getting hurt, that was it. I was done. I have more or less given up on What Doesn't Kill Us. I'm putting out a new edition soon, but I'm not promoting it. But it was hard. It's really hard for me as a writer to have supported someone for 10 years, to see you change, and for me to now sort of, I can either back you up or I have to leave. And there was no way to push you onto another path. And what I would like to do, what I really wish more than anything, is that you could see reality and you would stop fighting all of these people who are pointing out really well-sourced and obvious problems, and we can get on the same page again, the same page of facts. And, you could realize that people have been hurt and that you're not a perfect person and you're not always right. And, we can embrace the fact that, as I wrote in What Doesn't Kill Us, that you're a prophet and a madman. But you're just so embrace that prophet side over and over again that you have become the cult leader that I was afraid that you could have become. I would love to do I would love to have a conversation with you again. It could be off the record, or maybe even better to do it on the record. We could have a public forum, unedited, just us chatting on anyone's feed or whatever. I don't care about that. To sort of get to the truth of these allegations, because you're sort of making things up. You're saying that I've been in court cases that I haven't been, that I've done things that I haven't, and then you're undermining every person out there who's trying to put a factual report out. And that needs to stop. And you're trying to pursue it in the court, which is really just you trying to bully people, just like your son tries to bully people. You're trying to make the truth go away with your lawsuits. And that's not you. I mean, maybe it's you now. I hope it's not you. So that's my message directly to you, Wim. For anyone else who's stuck by here, you can just forget that bit. From Poke Bear LLC in Denver, Colorado, this was Scott Carney Investigates.